welcome to the Seahawks 360 podcast, where we look at the Seahawks from every angle every week. I'm Candace Higgins.
My name is Eat Crow. That's what's going to happen today. I'm Tino Candace.
And we are back to discuss some breaking news. It was just announced a few hours ago by Adam Schefter that the Seahawks have decided to part ways with offensive coordinator Ryan Grubb. This comes on the heel of a very explosive conversation between Tino and myself last episode. And so we thought it was only fitting to strike while the iron is hot and get to talking about this subject. So, um, Tino,
Yes.
like you said, you're eating crow. How you feeling, my guy?
Well, now that the move is done, I'm good with it. I think that there's the thing I'm excited about is it sounds like you were right in that Mike McDonald wanted to run the ball and Ryan Grubb did not want to run the ball as much. And um, so in that sense, because I love the running game and I believe in the running game as a way to win, that part is a positive for me. Finding a coordinator that believes in it, finding a coordinator with experience that believes in it. And, I want to see who's coming next. But as I said in the previous episode, I think what's most interesting to me and my biggest reaction is you invested a year in someone who was a very bright mind and talented in college, and you gave him 1 year to do it with a really shoddy offensive line. And so I feel, in the one sense, I feel really bad for Ryan Grubb because I don't feel like he was necessarily given a fair shake. On the other hand, if there were, as you very smartly kind of alluded to earlier, if there's a philosophical difference between the two, I think it does make a ton of sense to make the change now as opposed to after a couple of years. So, me, I'm a pretty positive guy. I'm looking forward to what's next. But as far as, what I expected to happen, no, this is not what I expected to happen at all. I expected them to give him another year.
Yeah, no, I also am excited. And I will say that I do think of Ryan Grubb highly as a coach and potential NFL coach in this league. I just think I think it'll take him some time. Um, a couple of things stick out to me. One, I think part of it, and the reason they chose Ryan Grubb, and maybe to your point, why he didn't necessarily get the fair shake is because by the time Mike McDonald was hired, that whole process was done. They lost quite a few offensive coordinator candidates at that point. They really had. So in terms of who was available, Ryan Grubb was still the best option, I believe, in terms of upside, in terms of, what could become of it. In fact, even though I know what's going to happen, if they had that set of options again, I think taking the upside on Grubb was still worth a shot. But the reality is they probably were looking. The word on the street was that they were really interested in Arthur Smith as a potential offensive coordinator, but Arthur Smith wasn't willing to wait out the ride, and he wanted to take a good opportunity when he saw one. So he ultimately ended up with the Steelers, and so that sort of left the whole coaching staff scrambling. I think part of the reason they make this decision so quickly sort of reinforces that idea in that they want to make sure they have all of the options available to them to be able to um, I'm not say do it the right way because you can only deal with the hands that are dealt to you, but handle it with more thoroughness than perhaps they had the opportunity to do last year.
I think it's interesting too. I wouldn't be surprised to see him go one of two places. One would be to Alabama to coach with Kalen DeBoer again because he was so successful, rebuild some of that reputation, and
Mhm.
be in college football where you can chuck the ball around the way it seems like he wants to. The other place it wouldn't surprise me to see him go is to Atlanta to coach the quarterbacks or to do something like that because he is so tied to Michael Penix and Michael Penix's success, right? And so those are two places it might be interesting to see him go. I do place some of the blame though on the front office and on maybe even Coach McDonald in that, you know, you gotta you gotta know who you're hiring. And if you know that
Yeah.
there's a philosophical difference between you and the dude you're hiring, you got to figure that out before you go through the season, right? In some ways, it was, well, I wouldn't call it a wasted season, but in some ways, if you did disagree that much, don't let it take a year, right? You should know that in the interview, either that or one person was telling the other person something that they didn't actually believe or didn't actually do. So I do think that there's, if we're assessing blame, there's some blame to be spread around to different places. And again, if I just think about it in real life terms, I do find it difficult to give somebody a year like that with that offensive line and then let them go. But again, I'm excited to see a run focused type of coach come in, and I do believe that is what Coach McDonald wants to do. He wants to control the ball, right? He wants to hold the ball for a long time. He wants to have a fresh, explosive defense, and I think that is what will happen. It's funny too because I know Arthur Smith was a coach. I know he head coach. I know he is known for liking to run the ball and some of the things that he does, but I haven't always been impressed with him either. I don't know that, he's necessarily like um Coach Nolan, the coach with Jim Harbaugh in I almost said San Diego with the Chargers. I liked a lot of his schemes. He's the one who drew up a lot of the stuff um for Kaepernick and for Lamar Jackson when Lamar first came to the NFL. And I don't know, you don't want that quarterback centric running game, but I like some of his running game ideas. The other place I think they will look is under the Shanahan tree, right? Because Shanahan is so well known for his run schemes and some of the unique stuff that he does. That would be kind of cool too to see them bring somebody like that in. But most of those guys don't have offensive coordinator experience yet, and I highly doubt they bring somebody in that does not have offensive coordinator experience.
Yeah, I kind of hope that that's sort of where my head's at. They need someone who's had experience calling plays because some of the biggest issues I think Grubb struggled with, and frankly, also so did Shane Waldron, is the sequencing. We talk about that, the layering of how you want your concepts to build off of one another to create a true plan of attack. And if you haven't called plays, then that means that play caller has still got to figure out what they want their identity to be. And I'm not sure that this team can go through another season of not having an offensive identity. What have all of the recent teams been struggling with? Identity. Shane Waldron, Ryan Grubb. Before that, Schottenheimer had an identity. We just didn't like it. Right? There was just some issues about that part. But that's sort of where I lean to. That's what I'm hoping the direction that they'll go in. I'm really, as long as it's an experienced play caller, I'll say I'm not going to be picky because I think that especially if they tweak some of the personnel a little bit on offense and improve that in the area and they fix the offensive line, I think the talent is there to still be at least a top 10 offense. We've seen that. If you're going to be a top 10 offense with also even an average defense, even if the defense stays where they are and they don't improve, I still think that's a team that come playoff time can still be dangerous.
Well,
Um,
here's what's crazy too, though. So I'm still gonna, and obviously it's water under the bridge now, but that offensive line was historically bad, and they were still the 14th best scoring offense in football. And so, in some ways, and some of it is playing catch up, right? Some of it was airing it out with Gino. But I also will say that, like, if you were the fourth, you weren't the 30th ranked offensive football, and he did this without any semblance of an offensive line, right? And so, we can talk till we're blue in the face about who's the next coordinator. But you could bring Ben Johnson in, who, for my money, is the best offensive coordinator in football. And you give him that offensive line, and he's not going to be able to do much. I still believe that no matter who that name is, if you're not rehaul or overhauling that entire line, it doesn't matter. It could be Candace Higgins or Tino Ganasius as the offensive coordinator, and we're not scoring. Nobody is scoring with that line. They're just not. So I do think when we talk about who we're bringing in as the coordinator, I think it needs to be understood that it's in conjunction with an overhaul of that offensive line, or else none of this matters, or else you still have a top eight talented, right, on a talent level defense, and you're not going anywhere because the offense is going to be trash.
yeah, I disagree a little bit to some extent. I don't completely disagree with you, but I do disagree that I think that Ben Johnson or really any advanced play caller could have done some things. We talked about this before. I felt like Ryan Grubb left some things on the table, and frankly, I think he put the offensive line in worse positions, rather than putting them in better positions. And I do think that there were still some things that could have been done. We saw them done with Shane Waldron. The quick, I mean, they leaned a lot on that quick game under Shane Waldron, and it worked. They still had a top 10 still had a top 10 offense. So I do think we've seen, even with just a better offensive line, better results. But I also think that, yeah, the offensive line is always going to be an anchor on this team, and it will always give them a clear ceiling until they address it. And
This line was worse. I'm sorry. This line in 24 was worse.
I think
I
this
know we
raw
debated
I
that
think this
for a good
line
45 minutes last week, but this line was worse to me.
I think this line looked worse because of the situations they were put in.
Two six-round
I,
picks, two 6-round picks, and Oluwatimi, who your words was he probably shouldn't be on this team this year, right? Plus Lake and Tomlinson and an injured Abe Lucas. I don't know. I don't want to get into it again. We did enough of
I
that,
wouldn't let down on
but
Olu,
but
but I will say
mm, mm, mm,
that Jake
mm.
Curhan and Stone Forsythe, who
Mhm.
still I think leads the team in pressures, by the
Oh, and
way,
Jay Curhan is starting for the Bears
and look what that's got them.
at guard. Hey, they won at guard though.
Yeah,
Okay, one thing real quick. This is off topic,
yeah.
but it just came to me. Does Gino throwing for 4 touchdowns and playing as well as he did last week do anything for how your outlook on with Gino on this team over the next couple of years? Did that game shift you at all? Like at all at all?
Nah,
Because
nah,
I
nah. I still stand where I stood before because I think it was against back. I'm glad he could do it, but it was against like backups. So that doesn't. I'm glad he made his numbers look better on the season for sure. Helps that touchdown interception ratio. Oh goodness, my words today. It helps that look a little bit better,
right,
not as damning,
right.
but that's really all it does.
I
He
think what
gets
it
more money.
did what it did for me, yeah, what it did for me is you know, not that I felt like he wasn't really good with time, right? With a little bit of protection. He didn't have Jared Verse breathing down his neck the way he did in the first game.
Right.
But when you give him, and I think that again, this screams how important an offensive line is. I think Geno Smith is a top, at minimum, top 10 quarterback, maybe even better than that, with meaning I see him around 9-10, but he
Mhm.
might even be better with a an offensive line that can protect him. I think when he has time, he is an elite quarterback, right? This is what all of the experts had been saying, for a long time is when you pick his tape apart, his ability to understand coverages, his ability to know where to go with the ball, right? His processing ability, his accuracy, are all elite. It's top notch, right? And I think seeing him play without Jared Verse in that game, primarily Verse, but also Fisk and some of the other guys that are able to put pressure on that Rams team, we saw what he was capable of. And obviously, you're not going to have that much time against other in normal games, right? Under normal circumstances. But if you are able to shore up that offensive line, I think Geno Smith can take you really, really, really far. And for me, that was exciting to see. Obviously he'll fall off a cliff at some point because of his age. But what it did for me is I felt as I said, I felt pretty comfortable with him playing in 25 as a starting quarterback, maybe looking at a succession plan for 26 whether you draft someone this year or next year, you have them, kind of watch and learn from Gino and understand how to be a professional. But hey, maybe it's 2 years, right? Maybe Gino plays 25 and 26, and maybe the offseason between 26 and 27 is when you bring in, you draft that quarterback who you see as a sophomore or a junior right now in college, and you say that's the guy we want as long as he progresses. There's a lot of talent in those classes as well. But I was incredibly impressed. I vacillate a bit with him, but when he has time, he's outstanding, and he picked them apart, man. He looked good last week.
And that's sort of why it's hard to defend him sometimes
Mhm.
because of some of the decisions that he makes. And I think he's always going to err on the side of having a higher number of interceptions. You just want enough touchdowns to offset that. And that's really what we were lacking this year. But he looked like who I thought he was. which is a guy who under good circumstances can really help a team thrive and can be a difference maker. And that's why I said I do believe that this team can make a Super Bowl with the right moves. You've got to fix our offensive line. You've got to, I think you got to tweak the wide receiver room a little bit. You got to do something different there. If nothing else, then that's to get a more you need something more than what Tyler Lockett gave you. That maybe Tyler Lockett, he
He's
did make
been
a comment
washed.
that his biggest contribution to this team was sacrifice. So maybe he feels a little underused in this offense as well. And so, you can debate how much of that is age and how much of that is just utilization. We'll see ultimately next year. But I think with some tweaks, tight end, talked about that. Though I like AJ Barner, I'd love to get something else too. Maybe just draft someone else with some high upside and another skill set.
Yeah. Where's our dude that's like 6'5", 6'6", like the TJ Hawkinson type, right?
Right,
Where
right.
the dude is fast and he's strong and he can block. And, and I know that those Hawkinson was a top 10 pick. I get that, there aren't that many of those guys around, but I don't feel like we've had, how long has it been since we've had a tight end like that ever,
I
right?
think on paper it was supposed to be Noah Fant, but he's not that guy.
No, and he's also not quite as tall. In my mind, I'm just thinking like there are places you can improve. Like I said, maybe you spend a second round pick on an explosive, outside receiver to take
Hmm.
over that Lockett role. And
Correct.
now, that you potentially groom to take over for DK if DK is too expensive. But I agree. I think there's something about the chemistry or the calculus of that wide receiver room and of the receivers as a whole, if you want to include the tight end, that could use some, I don't know, for lack of a better word, like mixing up or zhuzhing or something to kind of just get it to a place where there's more synergy, right? There feels like there's no synergy. Either the play is going to DK or the play is going to JSN. And it felt a little clunky. That could also be play calling, could also be route design, it could be a number of things. But I agree. And I've never been a huge Lockett fan. I think Lockett and Russell had great chemistry, right? When Lockett could fly, he could get behind the defense really easily. Those deep balls to Lockett were so much fun. Just absolute rainbows. But, I don't think that's the player he is anymore. And the type of player he was this year, I think they could find anywhere. Certainly not at the cap number that Lockett carried this year.
Yeah, and I like to say too, I didn't realize how much this was missing until I saw it in the last game here. But those deep shots to DK, they were kind of there in the beginning of the season.
100%.
They completely went away from that. And
100%.
that's DK's biggest strength.
Yep.
And I didn't realize how long it'd been since we'd seen DK being used at his biggest strength until, the last game. I said, how long has it been since I've seen that? And
Mhm.
that's also Gino's bread and butter to some extent. I mean, he's had some amazing passes deep down the field. In fact, the red zone's always been sort of a struggle with him. He got the touchdowns based on those explosives a lot of the times with DK.
You made a great point last week. I was thinking about it afterwards that, as big and physical as DK looks, right? As yoked as he is, his greatest asset is still his speed and it's still his deep speed. That's his greatest asset. So when, we're trying to use him in these post-up opportunities and we're trying to use him in these jump balls and things. And, is he good at those things? Sure. But really what scares the other team the most is go routes or
Yep.
deep posts and the kind of thing where your safety is running as fast as he can to have the right angle, on DK and the corners trailing him by like 3 yards because DK is just too fast. That
Yeah.
to me is why you draft him. That to or on a simple hitch route, right? Where you're getting him the ball quick and you're letting him try to break tackles and use his speed. It's just I feel like we were trying to do too much, and we saw what his inability to really move laterally is what it does is he was running those poor routes and hanging Gino out to dry.
Mhm.
Some of that is DK being lazy, but that was the knock on him. That's why he fell in the draft. He fell because he couldn't run the entire route tree because he was too stiff. So we're trying to put him in these positions to run these JSN type routes, and it didn't make any sense. So whether I put a lot of that on coaching, right? That's a lot on Ryan Grubb and play calling and play design, putting him in positions to fail. But yeah, it is encouraging, right? I don't know. In my head, I'm dreaming up this offense, getting back to offensive coordinator where you run the ball, you run the ball, you run the ball, you're under center. We're starting to see that under center come back a ton across the NFL. And then you're
Yeah,
going to play action. You run the ball effectively enough. So they've got to bring a safety up, right? Now it's eight in the box to stop the run. And all of a sudden, you've got one deep safety and they got to choose one side or the other. And if you've spent that high pick on a burner on the outside and you got DK on the other side, pick your poison, right? Chances are they're rolling them to DK, but that also means JSN has single coverage in the slot. There's just a lot of things you can do with the running game that can be really, really fun if they can dedicate resources to the offensive line, can run the ball. Now everything else opens up. So I don't know. I'm more inclined to keep DK now, thinking that what they want to do is more run game, deep shot towards this types of stuff. That's when DK becomes more valuable to your point, as we saw last week.
right. Exactly. Because that's exactly that's what I was saying is if they keep Grubb, I think you're much more likely to trade DK.
Yep.
And if they don't keep Grubb, then to your point, exactly. Then I think if you're getting closer to what Mike McDonald wants, then that's when DK is really valuable. But now, one thing I am interested in is we didn't get a lot of information from Mike McDonald. I listened to the Mike McDonald show
Mhm.
this morning, and he wasn't really willing to share what his offensive vision was. He was trying to respect the conversations that he and Ryan Grubb had. I still would have liked for him to be able to give some characteristics without, I mean, you can give some characteristics without giving away, a scheme. And maybe he just didn't want to put himself in a box when it
There was
comes
a
to
there's a
looking.
quote. Let me find it. There was a
Okay.
quote on in Brady that Brady Henderson had that talked about him wanting to run the ball.
Okay. And I
Oh,
wonder, I guess I say that because I've been curious as to how far over the spectrum he is, right? I'm curious as to when we get this new offensive coordinator, are we going to go back to feeling like the Pete Carroll days?
right,
And is he looking for true balance, or is he, you know, in previous years, the Pete got a little better with that in recent years, but in past years, is it running the ball to an absolute fault?
right.
And Mike McDonald seems pretty smart. So my hope is that he means running the ball for the purpose of having balance. But I'm not sure that that's true. And
Well,
I'm wondering if a lot of people, including myself, who are frustrated with Ryan Grubb and passing too much, if we will then also have an offense where we get frustrated with running too much in the next thing. And will there be any hindrances? Did this experience with Ryan Grubb, will it make him overcorrect?
right.
If that makes sense.
So I'll say that one, I think we got upset with Pete Carroll and him running the ball because they ran the same, you know what, all the time. It was the same play, right? And it was the same plays over and over again. And they were literally running the ball for the sake of running the ball.
Right.
And obviously that's not going to work. Not in the NFL, it's not because your five guys up front are not going to be that bigger, stronger, faster, better than the defensive line. This is the NFL. It doesn't work that way, right? You can't just run people over like an Alabama offensive line can in college football. But you can run the ball a ton if there's innovation, right? You can run the ball a ton. The Niners, when they were most successful, it wasn't Brock Purdy. Brock Purdy was successful because that running game opened everything up. And
Right.
teams were so great. You can't run Christian McCaffrey 20 times straight up the middle. He's too brittle, he's too small. But you scheme in ways to get him in the open field, right? And it looks very, very different. Just like if you
Yeah.
have a big back, you need to start him further behind the quarterback or an I formation or something like that. And you got to allow him to pick up speed once he gets to the line. Every back, right? That's what you do with Derrick Henry. You can't just start Derrick Henry and expect a Jahmyr Gibbs first step. And so it's designing the running game around your personnel, but it's also, again, being innovative. Like, I don't know if you watched Monday night, the Lions Vikings game, but what Penei Sewell can do at tackle and some of the stuff he does on some of the runs where he's pulling outside, right? He's running directly outside instead of, going into the line and then heading outside like most tackles do. He was so light on his feet, and the stuff they did with him was so cool. It's really highlighting who Jahmyr Gibbs is because Gibbs is so fast and he's
Right.
so great on the perimeter. So it's marrying your personnel, right? Marrying your personnel groups. It's having innovation as unsuccessful as Mike McDonald has been in Miami this year. Devon A-Chain has looked phenomenal, right? And some of the stuff they do with A-Chain in Miami is just cool. And it's not, I don't think K9 is A-Chain, but they're both smaller backs. They're both better on the perimeter. They're both, A-Chain's a lot faster than he is. But the point is, when you do that kind of thing, I don't think it's running game versus passing game. I think it's show me some innovation and
Yeah.
have balance in that there's at least a threat. You could be 60-40 run game, but if your passes are threatening, right? If your passes are those play action deep shots to DK and you've completed a couple of them, it doesn't matter if you're 40% pass, you're still super effective and the defense still you have to force the defense to defend both the run and the pass.
Mhm.
Else you're not scoring.
Yeah.
That's the thing that I don't think that the Seahawks did this year or last year, right? There was no, if they were chucking the ball around and scoring 24 points or 31 points, the other team didn't have to worry about the run game. They just happened to pass it on them. So I
Yeah.
don't know. I'm already done with Grubb, right? Grubb's done. What's next? I'm excited about this idea of a running game that is interesting and innovative. And the more I talk about it, the more I think I could see them bringing in someone from that tree, right? Or someone from the McVay tree. McVay does some cool stuff. He's really successful in the running game with some running backs who, quite frankly, aren't that talented. Kyron Williams was what, the third best back in football basically this year. And I don't think he's really that good. And they had a lot of offensive linemen hurt for most of the year, but I think it's scheme that is allowing him to do what he does. The other thing that McVay does that I would love to see the Seahawks do is, yeah, I talked about this on previous podcasts that Tom Moore did it with the Colts. They run the same personnel all the time, and they're running the same formations quite often. But they have so many variations out of those formations, right?
Yeah. Right.
That you can't defend it. It's there's no tell based on formation against a McVay team, which I think is super cool.
Yeah.
So
I
that
agree.
kind of thing, if we can talk about it as people with day jobs and just kind of, podcasters who enjoy watching and evaluating this stuff, the offense coordinator should be able to do it too. You know?
Should. It seems to be hard to find though. I heard someone say that Ben Johnson is the longest tenure offensive coordinator in the league. He
Mhm.
came in with Dan Campbell a few years ago. And
Crazy.
so
It's wild.
it's crazy. You either get promoted or you get fired. That's
Yep.
how it works.
Yep.
So obviously it's not that simple. I think the ability to adjust is critical, and I would like someone who can who has feel for the game. I think in fact that's my top quality. Experience is one. Second, feel for the game. If you detect a weakness, can you enforce that or play into that weakness that you identify? If a team is unable to stop your passing game, keep doing that. Don't just run for the sake of running. Keep that's when I'm okay with you passing it 50 times. If it's clearly working, it's clearly and force them to adjust to you, or just keep doing it all day long. Same thing with
Mhm.
the run game. Can you then, is there a team that's unable to stop the run game? And if so, I want you to run it down their throats. Again, doing it until they force you to stop is really what I would like. And I want to call it, a lot of times we say adjustments, and perhaps that's an overused term. Even Mike
Mhm.
McDonald has said that that's the case. Sometimes it's just feel for the game and understanding. I talk about this a lot with basketball and coaching, but I think it's not talked about as much in football, but it matters. Momentum,
Mhm.
um, and understanding how to use momentum in certain moments or really how to use certain play calls to build momentum. I think is something that no one talks about that often. That
Mhm.
if we had those two qualities, experience and feel for the game, understanding momentum, I think we'll be able to seriously make a deep playoff run, assuming they handle the offseason the way that they need to. And we'll talk
Right.
about what that is later, but
It, I was just looking at the most successful teams in football this year, right? And I'm trying to associate, running games with those teams.
mhm.
And you look at if you just go division by division, the Rams were able to run the ball this year. Kyron Williams was great, right?
Right.
Buccaneers, Bucky Irving was a revelation. And Mayfield played well, but Bucky Irving was a 1,000-yard rusher out of Oregon as a mid-round draft pick. The Lions can run the ball at will. Literally run the ball. A ton of their chunk plays come from off the run. The run establishes everything else, right? The Vikings were able to run the ball with Aaron Jones. It wasn't a great running game, a good one, but the Packers were 11-6, and Josh Jacobs was a top three running back in football. The Eagles, Saquon Barkley, right? You go down this list, the Chiefs are different. It's Mahomes, but then the Chargers, who ran the ball a ton, were 11-6. The Texans acquired Joe Mixon, right? Joe Mixon ran wild this year. The Ravens, obviously, with Lamar and King Henry, that's like the ultimate running team. You go through these teams, and unless your quarterback is Josh Allen or Patrick Mahomes, or maybe you can make the case uh, for Jaden Daniels. A lot of these teams had really incredible running games, and I think it opened up the pass for a lot of these teams. So I think we're seeing we saw so much shotgun and so much pass over the last couple of years. I think that the NFL is moving back towards balance, and I do think it is really interesting to look again at the most successful teams in the NFL this year, and they could run the ball. And I don't think that went unnoticed by the Seahawks. And Coach McDonald, as we both said, already wanted to run the ball. And then you see these teams be successful running the ball. He's going to want someone that's going to want to do it. I am. I'll say I was wrong. I thought Ryan Grubb wanted to run the ball more. Um, and I'm very surprised that there was a philosophical difference between the two. My assumption was always that he wasn't running the ball because they couldn't, and it sounds like he wasn't calling run plays because he didn't want to, which are two very different things. So I was incorrect with that.
Yeah. Now I sort of that was my read on it once I said because even in the game against the Rams, they've had some games where the running game is successful, but they just didn't.
The Charbonnet game.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
not just the one. I thought we had some good running game in the Rams game, in fact. But I'll say the Rams game was a little bit more balanced. The most recent one was a little bit more balanced, but I think there are just other games since that one Cardinals game that have shown they found something. Since they got
Mhm.
Lamea, actually. I would say since they got Sataya Lamea, I think they've been able to run the ball more effectively. Before
Mhm.
then, you're right, there was no wiggle room. But I think they've got enough windows now, at least on the right side of that line, that play into the running game a little bit more. And I'd say, namely, right guard. And they seem to be able to find some success with it on a yards per carry basis, just
Do you?
not with total production. So that's where that I begin to sort of say seems countering here. But I want to go off the point you just made to go. It kind of connects back to the point that I was saying before, in that you want to be able to have feel for the game because every one of those teams that you also named had a good running game.
Mhm.
They have the key weapons, skill positions,
Oh yeah.
threaten you in the pass game as well. So they can
Mhm.
choose why they're so good at the run game because they can threaten you just as well with the passing game.
Yep. Yep.
And so that's really and that's my hope. My hope is that they find someone who believes in both. That you need both, and that there are some games you're going to need to throw it all over the field, and there are some games where you're going to need to be able to run it down their throat and to be able to build a team. And it's not easy. It's it's not easy because you need certain skill sets. So I'm not saying it's just that simple, but the goal would be to build a team that whether you need to run or pass or be heavy in either or mix them both evenly, that you can do that to win the game.
I think what's interesting too is the Seahawks have the skill positions players to do that. They have
Right.
the talent at the skill positions to do that now, right?
Yeah.
It's the line and the play calling that holds them back from being able to truly do that. Now, if I can add on what you said, I agree with you completely, but I think the word that I would use is the ability to be multiple,
Yeah.
right?
I like
To
that.
threaten in various ways. So I think about the
Yeah. I like
Ravens.
that.
Like Zay Flowers was a Pro Bowler, but Zay Flowers is, JSN and Zay Flowers are pretty much a wash. I think they're very equal players, right? But he was the focus of the passing game. Now, Mark Andrews is a good tight end, and Rashad Bateman is a decent wide receiver too. But I don't think their skill positions outside of Henry are phenomenal, right? I think they're good, not great. But the
And they're
reason
elite.
why they're multiple, the reason why that offense is so darn good is Lamar Jackson is such a threat. in all facets that he himself makes that offense multiple because the fact that he can pass the way he can,
Yeah.
you got Henry. If it was just him throwing the ball and Henry, you still have a great offense. But you got to now worry about a third thing, which is Lamar running, right? So it makes defending that team so difficult. So I think you're spot on. If you can't threaten in multiple ways, NFL defenses are going to shut you down. That's the magic of Bill Parcells. Parcells would say, "I'm taking away the thing you do best, and if you can't do that next thing well, you're not beating us, right?" Or he would try to take away the best offensive player on the other team and say, let everyone else beat me. Same thing in basketball, right? Playing high school basketball. If I saw you were right-handed, I'm just going to force you left until you prove you can use your left. If you can use both, then cool. I'm gonna play you straight up. But until you prove you can use your offhand, I'm making you go that way, right? And I think I love that point that you brought up because I think it's so true. Is this Seahawks team can be great, but you got to be able to do both things. You just have to. You
Yeah.
have to threaten in multiple ways, otherwise the defense can gang up on you.
Let me ask you this. This is a name, and it's not a possibility that we really touched on, but it's a name that has been brought up. Some people have sort of murmured that this
Mhm.
is that they suspect that there will be an in-house promotion from Jake Peetz. Jake Peetz is from the Rams staff, and apparently he's far more involved in Rams affairs and how that organization operated than Shane Waldron ever was. Because Sean really didn't seem to care when Shane Waldron left, and we quickly found out why.
Right.
He seemed to care a lot more when Jake Peetz left. But I know we both mentioned that, we really want someone that's called plays before. What would be your reaction if that's where they went?
I'm good with it, honestly, because I think sometimes experience is really important. But sometimes experience for like you have coaches with experience that won't grow because they're stuck in what they've always done, right? And they're not able to actually grow into more. And so for me personally, I don't mind if it's an inexperienced coordinator as long as he's aligned with the front office and aligned with Coach McDonald and they're working together. And the bigger thing again from well, two things, it's the balance we just talked about and freaking innovation, right? Every sport, the best teams are innovative and are doing different stuff that's ahead of the curve. I want to see that. Like that's just something that the Seahawks, we haven't had that with the Seahawks since Pete Carroll was playing cover three, basically. That's like the last time we really had true innovation is
Yeah.
playing cover three as much as he did. So
Well, actually, I'll throw in this. I think people aren't gonna like it, but realistically, the way that Shane Waldron used those tight ends was pretty innovative. That's the only thing he did
why?
really.
Because he put two tight ends in the backfield next to each other and just decided to run some goofy motion.
No, they ran some three tight end sets and how they use those angles in
Yes.
terms of run blocking and pass catching and things like
Three
that. That
tight
actually really
three tight
was.
ends, one running back. Yeah, I remember some of that
It
stuff.
really some of the stuff was actually pretty cool, and it was called out in broadcast. So it's not just me, but it was like pretty
Yeah.
universally seen as innovative. It's not enough to build an offense on, so that means
Yeah.
that's not
So,
enough to mean anything like
right.
substantial.
For me,
But that's
it's
all we
not
got.
formation as much as it is blocking schemes and kind of giving to your point, calling plays in a different sort of rhythm that's not predictable, that's more interesting, right? So it's that sort of thing. It's the off tackle types of runs that the Niners run that are goofy and weird, and you got people going every which direction. That's the kind of thing. If Pete's is going to do that, cool, let's go, right? I'm down with it. Especially, I am worried about the lack of continuity, right? This will be the third offensive coordinator in 3 years for Gino and for some of the other players. I'm not worried about Gino as much as some of the others,
Yeah,
but if you have someone who's been in-house, whose voice is familiar, I think it's something that it could be a huge advantage.
yep, yep, no, for sure. So I that for my reaction, if they were to do that, and this is purely hypothetical, my hope is still that I know they're going to do a broad search for sure, and I don't think they're just going to lock in on any one candidate, including Jake Peets. But I think that if there is a player, if there's a coach that I'm looking for that doesn't have the play calling experience, I think I would rather go in house. And people are going to be traumatized by that a little bit because that's what Pete Carroll did. He'd always have these in-house hires, but it
Mhm.
really does seem like Peets is a really good option and probably was a strong voice. In fact, when we've had some good games and we've had some success, I remember Mike McDonald credited
Mhm.
Jake Peets for some of those things. My preference would still be experience, but I could understand the logic behind the bridging the gaps and continuity. I think that has a fair point. To counter that, though, I'll also throw in that at this point, most teams seem to be changing over coordinators at least every 2 to 3 years.
Yes. Yes.
So that's I worry less about that because it's not like it's you're then an outlier. It's plenty of teams that have had to learn a new offense every year. And while you don't love it, I think it is becoming more and more a part of just where we are. Also, another reason why I love some experience is because if you get a well-known name that fits what you're looking for philosophically and can make some of those momentum and be multiple still, and it has shown some track record of being able to do that, I think you may be able to keep that person longer actually than if Jake Peets comes in and
Becomes the
takes
next
off.
head coach. Becomes the next head coach.
Exactly, exactly.
So,
I think a retread actually might help you gain a little bit more continuity
right.
than, a hot shot new offensive coordinator who puts on a good offense.
So I was just thinking, as you were talking, I was thinking that it would not surprise me if this year, as the year went on, they realized that Pete's was a better coach than Grubb,
Yeah.
and that their decision might already be made. It wouldn't surprise me at all if they go and interview some folk, but Pete's ends up being the guy because they saw what he was capable of behind closed doors and said to themselves, he's aligned with what we want to do. I just saw that he's a Nebraska alum and that he was a coach at LSU. So I like both of those things as far as running the ball too. But it would not surprise me. In fact, I would put money on. I'd say it's a greater than 50% chance, in my opinion, that he is the next coordinator and that maybe they have like one or two pie in the sky candidates that they might go after, but that he's a very safe and excitable or choice that they would be excited about making, I think. The other thing is that it's I I love the fact that I get that he came from the McVay tree, right? And he coached at Alabama and he coached at LSU. There's some blue blood running game stuff to him that I think could be really, really interesting. I don't know. I didn't know enough about him until the end of the year,
Yeah.
but I would be super excited. And I think that again, a familiar voice for these players in the room is important. The other thing we haven't talked about yet is they said Scott Huff, they're still making a decision on it about the offensive line coach. But boy, if they run him back, yeah, I think he's gone. You run him back, he didn't show who did he help, right? Who did he who benefited from him being here? At best, he was average. At the very best, very, very absolute best, he was average.
I
And to
actually
me,
like Andy Dickerson better.
right.
Actually,
What was the
ironically, I mean, I felt like the stuff he was able to create in the run game was better than anything
one?
Scott Huff.
He showed out a little bit at the end of last season. He was actually they were talking about him a lot as far as some of the things he was able to do. I
Yep.
don't know if Laumea's development, I don't know who you credit that to. I don't really know. But I do think that there's some clay, right? And if there's some clay to work with, I think, Jarrell is some clay to work with. I think Charles Cross, even you could make the case that he hasn't had great coaching and he's a great athlete who needs better coaching. But to me, that hire will be almost as important as the offensive coordinator hire is
Yeah.
bringing in the right offensive line coach.
Yeah.
But
Great
yeah,
point.
I don't know. I'm down with Pete's being the coach. I that would work for me, and I do think that that might have facilitated the move off of Grubb, that they had someone in house that they knew already was at minimum a very good fallback, but may indeed be their choice already. The other thing is they have to, I don't know what the buyout was for Grubb, but it couldn't have been cheap because I don't think he signed a 1 year, a 1 year deal. And so if they're thinking about finances at all, then, Pete's can't be that expensive, being promoted from being an assistant coach to being the coordinator. I don't know. That's just a guess on my part, but not
Maybe,
that
but
Jody Allen is stressing for dough, but you know what I'm saying?
but if yeah, maybe. But if you're really trying to win this thing, I don't think that can factor into. I mean, I don't think it should. Rather, it can't. I don't think it should
That's
factor
the
into. But
Mariners
like,
brain.
if you're serious about taking a 10-17 and make them better, I don't think cutting edges on coaching money is the right way to approach that. But I'll say this: I don't know that Pete's is the guy. You said 60%. I go 40,
Mhm.
close, but
51, 51,
uh, was it what?
51,
51. Now
51%.
I go 40. I go 40. 40% chance that Jake Peets is the guy. Because to all your points, I think they're correct. But I think that's a little bit more Pete Carroll style. I
Mm.
think it would be 60 if it was Pete Carroll. I think Mike McDonald really genuinely wants to see what's out there. And frankly, I think Mike McDonald wants to have nothing to do with the offense. I really do. That's still my gut. And I think his preference would still be experience just so that he can trust that that end of the ball is taken care of. And he wants to still have some input in the vision, but he doesn't want to be down there in the weeds. That's not his instinct. He will if he feels like he needs to. And I think he would feel like he needed to more often with a first time play caller than he might like to.
I was going to add earlier that, and I think this is for me, a really important point that you can have turnover amongst your offensive coordinator and your offensive assistants if there is a strong, defined offensive identity coming from the GM and the head coach. If
Yeah.
Mike McDonald says, "This is the offense I believe in, this is the offense we are running," right? We are going to be run heavy, but we are going to be multiple. We are going to run play action. We are going to run under center. You're going to see 25 carries from my running backs every single game. I believe in doing this. I believe in ball control, that kind of thing, which I'm guessing that's probably 80% correct what I just said. Then the person you bring in as coordinator is going to have a lot of his job spelled out for him, and he's going to have to flesh it out, right? And he's going to have to execute it. I think that's why you see so many coordinators come from Shanahan, come from McVay, is because McVay's offense isn't going to change more than 10-15% because a new coordinator came in. Because McVay has a very defined idea as to what he wants to do. Now he's more hands-on with the offense, obviously, but
Right.
I think it's really, really important that with all of this turnover that Mike McDonald has a very strong defined idea and that he plugs in someone like a Pete's to help him execute it as opposed to Grubb coming in and saying this is what I want to do. I want to go three wide and do all the stuff that I did at UW. One other I know I'm all over the board, but one other thought with Grubb is I was thinking about this after Sunday's game at UW, he had Penix, who is a gunslinger, right? And Gino can be that. So I don't think the differences between those two offensively, philosophically, are all that different. But he had Odunze, he had Jalen McMillan, and he had Jalen Polk. And all three of those guys can move, have quickness and can move horizontally, right? Odunze is a big dude, but is an incredible route runner. McMillan is very slight and is very sudden and can move horizontally, right? And Polk is a smaller guy who it also has a lot of short area quickness and strength. None of those are like DK, right? And none of
Right.
them really are even like Lockett for that matter, because all of them had more size than Lockett. And so he, in some ways, I think was trying to plug in what he was successful doing at UW and he needed to recognize right away that Metcalf can't run those routes. And I think that's part of what got them in trouble with those late interceptions
Hmm.
is that he had him running routes that didn't make sense for his skill set. And as we spoke about earlier, but the interesting part is I think he was trying to plug in so much of what he did successfully at UW, and he just didn't have the foresight to realize that the players he had, the talent he had, we're not going to be able to run those same plays as effectively as he did there. So that was just something that came to my head as we were talking. I was like, DK is not any of them dudes, right? Odunze's calling card really, well, part of it is 50-50 balls, but a lot of it is he's a great route runner with size. That's just not who Metcalf is.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And to that point, I didn't get a chance to touch on this yet. One of the things that frustrated me hearing this quote, um, when Ryan Grubb was asked about what he learned in year one of the NFL, his response was that he hadn't changed that much,
Mhm.
but that he learned how to attack different families and defensive schemes of those families and sort of how those relationships work. To me, that's not enough learning.
Mhm.
From going to college to the NFL, that's not enough learning. Your answer should always be a lot. Like it's not hard. Even if it's, I mean,
Well,
I
do
get
you
he was
think
trying to be honest, but I feel like his play calls exhibited that there wasn't
he was
much
gone?
progression, that there wasn't change.
Right.
What
Do you think he knew he was gone when he
I
said
don't
that?
know. I think he might have because he
Because
sure
that's the
that
kind of
sure
answer
was.
where you're like, I didn't do that much wrong. And so I'm just going to put this out there because I don't think I did as much wrong as they're going to tell you I did tomorrow, right?
Yeah,
That's the kind of like flippant, I'm mad. I'm about to tell you I really wasn't as bad as everybody thought I was. That's what
it
it,
caught me off guard. I said
it
he
felt
said he
guard
didn't
too.
learn. He
I
didn't
saw it and
change.
I was like, all the players said he was humble and he was open to learning. And a lot of the quotes that came out about him said that. And, he might have actually been that way. But at the end, when he knew he was gone and he was frustrated with it, he might have just been like, you know what, I'm done. But you're right. In my opinion, and this is just, I don't know, this is more of a personal thing. But if someone asks you, like, how do you think you did and what did you learn? You're always going to give like at least in my opinion, the way I am, you give the humble answer and you just say, you know what? I came in with some ideas. Some of them worked, some
Yep.
of them didn't. I'm really excited for next year and what's next, right? There's a lot of things that I think I can do differently. There's a lot of play designs that I found very interesting around the NFL. I saw
Yep.
some defenses I've never seen before. I can't wait to get in the lab and figure out how to attack those. Admittedly, we were a middle of the road offense. I think we could be a lot better next year. That it's so easy to just say that and move on. That's simple PR training, right?
Correct.
You just say
Yeah,
it and you
I
move
say
on
I don't
because
think
it
I've
does no
changed very much.
damage. You do no damage to your reputation by saying that.
To me, that confirmed that they needed to move off of him.
Mhm.
Because if you didn't change much from year one in the NFL, then one extra year was never going to be enough for you to get it.
Right. Or
Maybe you
maybe
eventually.
maybe he did and he was just pissed off and so he gave the opposite answer because he was just angry, right? I
That's
think that is a
that's
very
true too.
that is a possibility. We
But
all
either
think
way,
that way sometimes, right?
yeah, but either way, it wasn't a good look. And I'll say
Yes.
this: I think Ryan
Yes.
Grubb he talked a good game. He
Hmm.
really did. I mean, because, and this is why I think I don't blame it. I do blame to some extent John Schneider and Mike McDonald, but I also think that Ryan Grubb sold his ability to have a strong run game in the beginning because he sold all of us on it. When
Hmm.
he was asked in interviews, when he was in training camp, and people were asking about this offense, he emphasized it. What did DK say? The first meeting they had, he said, "We're going to run the ball."
Hmm.
Okay, that couldn't have been more opposite from the truth. So I think he maybe thought he was going to run the ball more. Maybe it changed. I'm not sure where the disconnect was
When he what
between what he ended up saying and what it was.
when he realized he had the worst offensive line in football and one of the worst offensive lines in years, he was like, "All right, we can't run the ball, so we
I
got to
don't think
do
it will
something
work.
else."
Yeah, we still disagree on
But if
that.
you're expecting Connor Williams to be an all-pro or a pro bowler like he was the previous year and a top run blocker and he comes in and then he quits because he's trash, that's frustrating, right? That's hard to deal with.
Yeah,
He
for sure. I think it was
just
I think that was such. I'll give. But I'll say that as injured as the line was before that, you basically just had the same thing. Now retiring is different, but I will say the center literally immediately retired right after because
just left. He
he was
just
just that
Bruce
bad.
out. He was like, "I'm done," right?
Yeah,
I
he
I
at
didn't
least
like
finished the
like
season.
anything.
But as I say, I don't think it was a gigantic difference. I will say a mid-season retiring is different than the end of
Yeah.
season and retiring, but it was pretty obvious that he should.
Like anything else, Like, I think the truth is somewhere in the middle, right? I'm sure
Yeah.
he abandoned the run because he knew they couldn't run. And I'm sure Coach McDonald didn't, he's like, don't care if you don't gain any yards with the running the ball. I want to run clock and I want to try to establish this identity. We may not win, but I want this to be our identity. And then Grubb would be in the heat of the moment and he's calling pass plays. I think it's always, truth is always somewhere in the middle. And I think that in this case, I think he both knew the running game was terrible and gravitated way, way, way too much to the passing game. But it is
And
what
I'll
I'm
say this, what made it unfortunate is timing wise. If to your point, if it was based on the offensive line, that they actually plugged in Lamea, and that made things a lot more tenable in
Mhm.
terms of being able to run the ball. And so then it made it more problematic when we had a little bit more wiggle room in terms of the run game, and then we still didn't do it even then. And so that's why I tend to lean that it wasn't just the offensive line because the personnel did improve, but I don't know if by then emotionally he was just so frustrated with it. But there was opportunity in the second half of the season to genuinely be able to run the ball with the offensive line wasn't the same
Right.
uh, albatross in the run game that
Right.
it was in the pass game. The pass game was still just as bad, but
I,
but you know,
I
and I
got a
think
couple
frustrated. I
names here.
don't know what.
So I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, no, go ahead.
The Athletic just came out. Michael Sean Dugar came out and said he gave a couple of names. I got to get out of here soon. He gave a couple names. First name that came up, in-house candidates, Jake Peets. First
Mhm.
name he brought up. Second name, up and coming candidates, T. Martin, the Ravens quarterback coach, the old quarterback from Tennessee that
Mhm.
he was after Peyton Manning. Nick Caley, who's the Rams tight end coach and the passing game coordinator for the Rams, again, getting back to that same tree again. Jason Vrabel, who's the Packers passing game coordinator. So under LaFleur, same tree again, right? Same group. And then Doug Peterson, who you had talked about, I'm a no-go on that. Here's a funny one. I'm also a no-go on this one. I don't care if he would be good. Mike McCarthy, coach of the
Yeah,
Cowboys.
I'm a
I'm
no-go
good
on
with
that one.
that.
I'm yeah, I'm a no-go on that one. Without a head coach, offensive coordinator, it really doesn't matter to me.
I don't want him anywhere near my team. That's where I'm
I
no.
don't like him.
I
I
don't
just don't
even.
like him, and
And
I'll admit
then
personality plays a role.
Mike Kafka.
I
So we
want. I
talked about
actually,
him a little bit.
I'm interested in him as an offensive coordinator, not a head coach,
Mm-mm.
but as an
And
OC.
then Alex Van Pelt, who was the offensive coordinator for the Patriots. Like, I don't like Van Pelt much. I think Kafka's interesting, and I think he is a good mix of youth and both youth and experience.
Yep.
And I think that would be pretty
That was my
interesting. I remember when he was a quarterback in Northwestern, actually. Um, but it's interesting; those names just came out on the Athletic, and I felt like it was appropriate to bring those names up. Uh, Based on what we had been talking about. But it's funny that Pete's is the number one name that was on that list.
It definitely is. And I think it's a little bit more inexperienced than I would want on that list. But assuming that I don't know if this is by leaks by sources, if they have sources on these guys, or if this is just a list that Dugar is, coming up with himself. But either way, I like the name Mike Kafka. I think that's probably of all the candidates he named, it's probably my favorite.
Mhm.
Then I'd probably go Doug Peterson, then Jake Peets. Because and my experience matters to me, man. Just the experience factor is my preference, so that's kind of why I
Right.
switched the two. But I not mad at Jake Peets. It just makes me nervous.
I like Pete's and Kafka myself. I think the tight ends coach for the Rams, I don't know a ton about, but I
Right.
like the idea of pulling from your rival and pulling from that team because I like what McVay does. Um, T. Martin, I don't know. It's hard to pull from the Ravens, right? Because on the one hand, Mike McDonald knows all those dudes, and so it makes a lot of sense that he would pull from there.
Mhm.
On the other hand, like how much of that offense is simply Lamar Jackson being a superstar?
Right.
Right? It's hard to say how good the scheme is and how great, kind of the coaching staff is when you've got freaking Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry and you
Yeah.
spent first round picks on your offensive line. That alone should get you pretty far. So I don't know.
Right.
It's gonna be fascinating. It's funny because we can end it here. We talked a lot, obviously, for those who listened last week. was an intense conversation. I was pretty adamant that I felt like Grubb was getting a raw deal. I was pretty adamant that, I think you give somebody 2 years, but I'm excited. I think this was the right move. And I feel like, once it happened and I'm good with it, like dreaming about what's next makes a lot more sense to me than talking about how Ryan Grubb can improve, right? The ceiling is much, much higher dreaming on, a new talent and a shift in offensive philosophy
Yes,
and hoping that Ryan Grubb calls more running plays and finds some innovation in year two. I think this was the right move in hindsight, and I'm very excited to see what's to come because the defense we have is a top five defense in the NFL. So you pair an offense that makes sense with that defense that can control the ball a little bit and control the clock. And is still threatening in multiple ways. And this is a Super Bowl contending team potentially.
100%, 100%. Yeah, that's kind of where I stand. We'll follow this and track this along and see. Mike McDonald mentioned that they'll be thorough, but try to be efficient.
Mhm.
So I expect it to not drag on as long as the head coaching search did for Mike McDonald. But I do think they'll take a little time to evaluate their options as interviews come out. We'll react to them and let you guys know what we're thinking. But that's it. That's all the time we have for today. Tino, tell the people where they can find you.
Tino Junior 20 on BlueSky, TINOJR20. The lots of fun baseball queries if you're a baseball numbers nerd like me. Um, Putting up a bunch of stuff that I've been working on with my database, enjoying that quite a bit in my free time. Can also talk Seahawks, especially given my pro Ryan Grubb stance that's starting to shift a little bit now, or it has to shift now. But yeah, and I'm super excited for what's to come with both our podcast and the Seahawks. It's gonna be a fun off season.
Absolutely. We'll try to keep up with all the action. So be sure to follow us on social media on X at Seahawks360 Pod and on Blue Sky at Seahawks360. If you're listening on YouTube, please be sure to give us a like and a subscribe to us. Really makes a big difference with the algorithm, trying to get our clientele listenership up. In the meantime, that's all we have time for today. That's it. We're out. And as always,
Oh,
oh,
Hawks.